Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is the second latest Spider-Man film to come out in the last few years. Directed by Peter Ramsey, Rodney Rothman, and Bob Persichetti, it is critically acclaimed to be one of the best animated feature films in recent years. As described by IMDb, the movie tells the story of teen Miles Morales becoming the Spider-Man of his reality, crossing his path with five counterparts from other dimensions to stop a threat for all realities. As a movie that has practically mastered the art of animation, there is no doubt that the movie expresses very strong character performances through its animation. This is how animation principles are expressed through character. As the two main characters of the movie, the relationship and personalities of Peter and Miles is the most important. For starters, at the beginning of the movie, Miles is a young boy entering a new school with a very complicated family dynamic. When out with his uncle one day, he gets bitten by a spider and gains the powers of Spider-Man. After witnessing the death of his world's Peter Parker, he becomes reluctant and scared of the responsibility just laid on his shoulders. Best stated by his voice actor Shamik Moore, he states,
And be him, and live up to what he's been doing, and you have 2 days to do it. Like, yeah, that's a responsibility right there.
Peter, on the other hand, is a different story. Unlike the Peter Parker of Miles' universe, who led a happy and successful life as Spider-Man, he is a version of Peter that is tired and worn out of the role. He recently had a divorce and lives in a tiny dingy apartment. As described by Jake Johnson in an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Peter needs to be reminded how great it is to be Spider-Man again. Together, they make a mentor-student dynamic, Miles begging Peter to teach him to be Spider-Man, while Peter is unwilling and disinterested. In this scene, we examine how the 12 principles of animation create the overall personalities of these two characters. Let's first examine Peter. As shown in this scene, Peter is currently tied up, so most of his movements are confined to his face. The squash and stretch in his face is very stiff, showing that he is very above trying to show any amount of effort to speak with Miles. His face moves in small arcs that position his head away from Miles, as if he'd rather examine his surroundings rather than face the boy. The timing of the facial movement seems to shift depending on whether he is paying attention to Miles or the surrounding room. When talking to Miles, the animation becomes slow and inanimate, while when he's focusing on trying to escape, he becomes much more animate and alert. Exaggeration also helps with this aspect of the scene. Animators must exaggerate his facial animation to effectively stage his emotions. In this shot, when we see Peter pulling against his restraints, his movements are over-exaggerated, his body moving in large arcs with large amounts of anticipation before he does so. The way his body shrinks in anticipation when he goes to lunge into this big arc demonstrates an attempt to intimidate Miles, but not to escape, as we see him do so easily later. The follow-through and overlapping action of this shot also helps exaggerate the force of which Peter is moving, by how the punching bag he's tied to arcs and stretches with the shapes Peter's body is making. In direct comparison, we have Miles, who unlike Peter is not restrained, thus a lot more freedom of movement. Miles expresses himself much more through his body movements than his face. Because of this, straight-ahead action and pose-to-pose becomes very integral. Phil Lord, when asked about the animation, describes how telling stories in sequential art is all about the key pose and going from pose to pose and frame to frame. It makes the key poses of the animation very jumpy and snappy in places, going along with Miles' very active personality, although I would hazard a guess to say that this is also because they decided to animate on twos to make things seem a lot more crunchy, as the producers put it. It shows some semblance of Miles being timid around Peter, as shown represented through solid drawing, such as in this shot right here. His key poses are very animate and alive, and solid drawing helps apply a certain naturality with the way he expresses himself. The use of solid drawing is very important for how those key poses work in the 3D space, especially in this shot. In this shot, Miles is spinning around and moving to a very flat, wide shot. Thus, solid drawing is necessary here, otherwise the character would look off balance. Slow in and slow out is also important here because of the amount of movement he's making in this shot. As combined with solid drawing and pose to pose, it creates that one believable, continuous movement that portrays the excitable and young nature that he has. Together, these two characters create a strong sense of staging and secondary action, along with a lot of appeal as well. Peter and Miles are seen on two opposite sides of the spectrum in this scene. Miles is positioned closer to the ground and in the light, while Peter is portrayed up high and in the dark, often with his back to Miles. Miles in this scene is representative of youth, yearning to be taught by someone older and wiser. Peter, on the other hand, is seen as an elder, more tired and depressed. Secondary action is tied into this when the wide shot is present, and we can see both characters moving in tandem with each other. Here, for example, when Peter is the central focus, Miles is seen darting away from Peter as he tries to wrestle free of his confinements. And here, while Miles is the focus, we can see Peter hanging still, facing away from Miles as if he can't be bothered to look at him while he speaks. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is a movie that has practically mastered the art of animation and has thoughtfully incorporated animation principles to express the characters. Through the use of the 12 principles of animation, the movie creates believable character performances that make the overall movie experience better than it ever could have been. Directed by Peter Ramsey, Rodney Rothman, and Bob Persichetti, it has earned its right to be as critically acclaimed as it is.